I'm still optimistic about the performance of the market for the full year. I don't think there's any recession in sight. I think the situation in Turkey is serious for the moment, but I don't think it represents systemic risk. I think the market was overbought and overdue for a correction. We're having a correction. Turkey is the trigger. I think it's going to represent a buying opportunity.
All right. There's some who say the political characteristics of Turkey are unique, maybe even throw in Argentina in that. But then what about Brazil? What about Indonesia? What about Russia? What about Mexico? What about China? How far do you take that narrative?
Well, I don't think it's going to extend to anything other than the marginal emerging markets. I don't think China will be affected. I'm not sure about Mexico or Brazil. But the gorilla in the room is China, and I think the Chinese growth is pretty much intact. The problem in China is the non-performing loans on the books of the banks and the shadow banks. They're doing something to correct that. But I think China growth of 6% or better is pretty much intact.
Byron, I'm watching what tech stocks are doing so far this morning. Apple is off less than 1%, Qualcomm off less than 1%, names like IBM too, but Facebook, Netflix off more. In this environment where particularly emerging markets might be a bit more unstable, should investors be a little bit more cautious about stocks that are relying on a growth story to justify their valuations to some degree?
Yeah, well, the valuation is key. I mean, Apple is a relatively cheap stock. Netflix is a relatively expensive stock. Amazon is expensive. So my view is that's where the growth is. Those are the exciting stocks, but they may have gotten a little bit ahead of themselves. At some point, they're a buy, but right now, I'd wait and see.
And Byron, to dig into that a little bit more deeply, I mean, you mentioned before that you see this as a potential buying opportunity. What would you be buying right now?
Well, I would buy the growth stocks. I'm still a growth stock investor. Those are the companies with open-ended earnings, and I think they'll reach a price, an interim price in this correction that'll represent an attractive opportunity.